them and hold on to it for a moment. First of all, to you, Carlton, can you start by just telling us what brought you to this project?
Wow, let's see if we can find a short version. Well, there's a couple of turning points. I mean, one was in 2015, we'd finished the second big 1,000-mile Florida Wildlife Corridor expedition. I went to my editor at National Geographic magazine and said, I want to do a story about the Florida Wildlife Corridor. And she said, well, that's interesting to people like us, but National Geographic's not going to do a story on the Florida Wildlife Corridor, but we might do one about the Florida Panther, and we can communicate the story of the corridor through that. So, 15-minute conversation sent me on like a 5-year quest. But it was really that combined with seemed like a just opportune photo assignment later that summer that sent me to Florida Panther National Wildlife Refuge as one of 10 different parks where it's just a simple travel assignment. But I took a one-day assignment and turned it into a 2-month effort to try to get a camera trap picture of a panther. And I failed miserably. I got a good bear shot. I got a very frustrating panther shot of it walking away from the camera. It kind of lured me to try to follow that story and started to understand what that animal represents for connecting the landscape in Florida.
What do you think it is about this animal in particular? I've thought about this a lot. Why the Florida Panther, not the manatee, or the owl, or the gopher tortoise? What is it about the panther that sort of inspires us all?
I mean, the inspiration front is, lots of opinions can go there, but it is a uniquely Florida animal. I mean, this is the last puma east of the Mississippi River, and the only place it exists in the eastern United States is Florida. And the only breeding population, even now, is relatively far south in the state. But biologically speaking, it's because it has the widest horn range of any terrestrial animal on this continent. I mean, a single male Florida panther has a home range of up to 200 square miles, and that's twice the size of Orlando, 4 times the size of Miami. You need a lot of land, so they're the perfect ambassador for why we need to have these large connected green spaces.
Eric, how did you first connect to this project? What inspired you in the beginning?
So Carlton, it was one of those phone calls that you're kind of like, okay, what am I getting myself into here? But Carlton reached out to me when he first started his photo mission. So he was primarily focused on photos for what would be the forthcoming National Geographic magazine feature article. And I thought to myself at the time, well, this is going to be an interesting quest. And the process of trying and failing, as all of us know, is actually sort of great for storytelling. So I knew there was going to be a lot of failure. I did not know there would be really any success. So there was a few pictures of Panther's backside, that appear in the film. And shortly afterward, the female Babs intervened in our story and really took over all the headlines. I mean, she was in the New York Times when she moved north. It was this watershed moment, and we were hearing from people all over Florida that this was the time, now was the time. And really that's where kind of our idea sort of went out the window, and then the story just kind of unfolded and became what it is today. And we just kind of held on. And sometimes by, just barely hanging on, because it was a lot of twists and turns along the way. This team and the Wild Path team, Grizzly Creek, all of us really just didn't know where we were going for quite a large percentage of making it. But that's part of the experience of a feature film, and I think audiences, actually like to think, like to see stories where they don't know what the outcome is. So that's been the adventure.
And this is a big film involving a lot of people and a lot of animals. How do you select characters through which to tell the story? And I thought it was interesting, the film opens and closes with Betty Osceola, am I right? How do you select, you've got so many people to work with and tell the story through, how do you select characters?
You know, Betty is, such an incredible person, first of all. Her roots are so deep, but then the first time that we talked to her about this film, she just came right out and said, "I'm Panther Clan." And so I thought, there's no way we can make the film without her voice. There's no way to make this film complete without her voice. And she really brings home what it means to be Panther Clan and to take on that role of guardianship over the natural world.
Tori, a lot of people probably aren't familiar with your title, Impact Producer. What on earth does that mean? What did you bring to this?
Well, this is a very friendly audience, so I will share that I'm also the managing director of the Path of the Panther Conservation Project, and you have undoubtedly gotten an email from me over the last 5 years if you're in this room. I work at the nexus of storytelling and policy, really to ensure the work we're doing results in tangible change across this landscape. And so, this film's quite interesting, quite different, I would say, compared to a lot of the work our colleagues are doing, in that it was one part of a much broader impact campaign our team's been working on over the last 5 years. So we had, in 2021, the production of a film that we premiered here at the Tampa Theater, Saving the Florida Wildlife Corridor, which we shared with our policymakers in Tallahassee and was behind the push for bipartisan unanimous passage of the Florida Wildlife Corridor Act with many of our partners who are in the room tonight. And we're really excited on the tail of this film to then be presenting other assets, including really comprehensive educational curriculum. It's our goal to get this film, or at the very least make it accessible to every K through 12 classroom in this state. And I'll add off of that, we need your help doing so please get in touch if you're interested in being a part of that. But we have a lot before us in ensuring that this landscape is connected into perpetuity. We hit on in the film that the Florida Wildlife Corridor is comprised of 18 million acres, 10 million of which are currently protected, 8 million of which still require protection. And to reach that goal, we need state and federal support from our policymakers, and that requires enduring public support and action. And so I really appreciate your point. This is becoming a movement, and we all have a role to play in protecting our own backyard.
It's interesting to me. Just show of hands, which of you are asking for the toll roads?
Daddy.
Representing the audience, who's calling their
Down
walk?
there, Mommy. Get it, Mommy.
I wonder if, speaking of this, what can people do? What do people take out of this theater after seeing this film? And how do the regular Joe Sixpack apply sort of this to our lives? How do we be better citizens when it comes specifically to the Florida Panther?
Sure, so in the most broad terms, I would say show up, advocate, learn. Showing up at your county commission meetings matters. Being an educated voice in the room matters. Sharing what we're losing at such overwhelming rates with your friends and neighbors and community matters. To really simplify that, I would also say please visit pathofthepanther.com. We have a wealth of resources there that our team who's in the room tonight, including Malia Burtis, Lauren Yoho, and Lisa Baylor, have been developing that give you really specific calls to action, including immediately signing our Path of the Panther pledge, which will help keep you up to date with calls to action over the next 6 to 9 months. There will be many. We have really exciting progress coming in the landscape.
Thank you. Doctor, can you please tell us, if you don't mind, give us an update on the neurological issues affecting these young panthers? This is where you came into the picture, by the way, when these kittens, 3 years ago, when these kittens arrived at Zoo Tampa, you got to know them and care for them a lot.
Yeah, so sadly, the two cubs, or the two kittens that you saw in the movie, their mother was affected by just the most horrible disease you can imagine, just heartbreaking as
Daddy,
the
get
film
off.
shows. And
Get
so
off.
the kittens were brought to Zoo
Get
Tampa
off.
because mom
Get
couldn't
off.
take care of
Get
them,
off.
and we raised them there, and they were thankfully fine, but every test in the book was run on them because they're still trying to figure out what causes the syndrome. So far, as Carlton said in the movie, it does look like something environmental. They looked for every sort of infectious disease, virus, bacteria, all that sort of thing, and found nothing. In fact, Carlton was there when we brought the mom up to UF, and unfortunately she had to be euthanized or put to sleep because she was just so severely affected. And they looked at everything that they could possibly look at and couldn't find out what caused it. So it's still an enigma. It's probably some sort of toxin in the environment, is my understanding. They get exposed to it, it causes this damage, and then it leaves their system. So by the time they come to us to try to find out what it is, it's not there anymore. But we are very, very grateful that her babies lived on, and they're at White Oak now. They're completely healthy and great and running around and living their best lives. So that was a real special thing for us at the zoo to be able to raise them, but also be able to talk to the public. We get over 1 million visitors every year. And so we're passionate about the corridor. We're partners with the Corridor Foundation. Carlton's on our board. And the questions and the comments that we got from people about the new toll roads, well, those kittens were there, were unanimously not in favor. And there are those ambassadors, right? They're the ambassadors of the species that are teaching people, just like the animals in the movie.
That's This is something that Zoo Tampa does a lot, works with, hand in hand with
I
efforts.
want to watch something.
Yeah, so at Zoo Tampa, one of our major conservation goals is Florida wildlife. So we have Manatee Critical Care Center that a lot of people know about. I think a lot of people didn't know up until now, probably, our involvement in the Florida Panther situation. We do get the call when there's animals in trouble, and they come to the zoo just like you saw in the movie, and we lend our expertise and our care for them. So we're really proud to be able to do anything we can to try to support this situation with the Panthers.
By the way, a couple more questions for you, but we would love to take some questions from the audience. And I noticed there's a microphone on both sides, so now's the time. If you'd like to ask a question, probably form a line at the microphone.
I don't have enough time. I want to put a video for them.
Before we get to that, December 1st of this year, the Panther was hit. Interesting news, where this panther was struck, eastern Hillsborough County. You all heard this news? So what does this say about the Florida Wildlife Corridor, about connectivity, if anything, that this panther was in eastern Hillsborough?
Yes, it was a male panther, and it was the first time one had been that far north in like 20 years. It wasn't more than, 15 miles, 10 miles south of I-4. So on one hand, that's really tragic that we lost a panther. On the other hand, it shows that part of the wildlife corridor is still functionally connected, because that panther, as far as anyone knows, was still born likely south of the Caloosahatchee River, and it made its way up to the edge of Interstate 4. So it shows that there's still time to secure some of these connections.
No.
Interstate 4 is interesting because it bisects the state. I was out a couple of months ago, I think we were there, maybe. if not, I could be misremembering this, but FWC, or sorry, FDOT is building a wildlife underpass in Polk County, in western Polk County. And in my conversations with folks with FWC, they're sort of presenting the face of FWC. It's not all about roads building, I was happy to hear. Lately, they are incorporating things like underpasses for the wildlife. These are signs of hope, I imagine, for you guys.
Absolutely, and we saw in the film how well those wildlife crossings do work. The one you're talking about is reconnecting Halochi Wildlife Management Area between here and Orlando, an area that's been divided since the interstate was built. I want to take a moment to make an important point about wildlife crossings, because I think as humans who travel roads and are used to that kind of infrastructure, we gravitate towards those kind of technical solutions on the landscape. But a wildlife crossing is useless unless you have a permanently protected habitat corridor on both sides of the road.
Yeah.
So to me, the priority is still the habitat connectivity. And then you have time to go back and retrofit with better permeability for the roads. But I do commend the Department of Transportation. They're being quite proactive in planning, building underpasses. There's 3 underpasses between Orlando and Daytona Beach through I-4. And it brings up one other point to share. We touched on it in the film, but tying back into the issue of the neurological disorder and just the location of that Panther here south of I-4, it's all about access to more territory. Panther numbers down from 20 up to nearly 200 today. To be considered recovered from their endangered status, there needs to be more than 600 Panthers, and that's going to require access to 3 times as much land. So Panthers need to be having access to historic territory in Central Florida, North Florida, and beyond. And the neurological disorder drives that point home. Because if you have all the Panthers in known existence in the eastern United States in one little area of South Florida, something like a disease or disorder can really take them back. But if there are Panthers in Ocala National Forest and the Okefenokee Swamp and Apalachicola, you have a lot more stability and resilience to environmental challenges.
Got a lot of questions here, so let's go ahead and turn to this side just because the line is a little bit longer.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to ask this question and address essentially everybody up front here, the rest of the room. My name is Joe Alvarez. I was born and raised in Polk County. I grew up in fish all of these areas you're talking about. Halochi, right up there in the Green Swamp area, the Kissimmee Channel Lakes area. I grew up all over that, and it's interesting where the wildlife corridor video where you went through the Creek Ranch, it was bought. Now it's the Asana Ranch. Now I believe it's actually slated for development. A lot of those areas along the Kissimmee Channel Lakes area up through Lake Toluca are now slated for development. I think we all can agree in this room that the *1 enemy of the state is development. And so when we're talking about FWC,
Yeah.
and I tip my hat to Carlton and the FWC people on the ground. And for those in this room, I don't know if you've ever read the FWC mission statement before, but it's protecting Florida's natural resources and people through proactive and responsive law enforcement services. The vision is to be recognized as the leading conservation law enforcement agency in the nation, set apart by strategic vision, clear missions, strong leadership, and a professional officer corps. So if that's the FWC's mission statement and their vision for this state, we know what the enemy of this state is. Do we not recognize who we have running the FWC? Rodney Burrito, the chairman, is a developer. The majority of the FWC commissioners are developers. If we want to be the change that we need to see, we need to ensure that the people that are running the show are not the enemy of the state.
I appreciate the point.
I just want to make that point for everybody in case that we do that.
I appreciate that. Let's ask questions of the film since we got these guys here. Go ahead. I'm sorry, over here. You next.
Hi, my name's Oliver Lotsko. I grew up in Fort Lauderdale all my life. I'm a student here in Tampa. I just want to first and foremost thank you for your advocacy, for your photography. I think it's one thing to advocate, but to see how advocacy can turn into tangible success, that is so impactful and powerful, so thank you. You brought up a great point, sir, that a panther was tragically killed on I-75 here in Hillsborough County just a few months ago. And I think what I was thinking of during the film was, you know, so many dynamics that go into Florida panther conservation, the wildlife corridors, urban spaces that encroach onto territory that the Florida panther may exist within, hurricanes. How do we better prepare and educate both our civilian population and better prepare our cities for the presence of a Florida panther when perhaps a hurricane may drive a panther out of its natural habitat into more urban spaces? How do we take those kinds of dynamics into consideration? Thank you.
Okay, I think that you can look to Naples, Florida for an example. I mean, the panthers and the development are very much interlaced in those areas. There are the things a couple things we can learn. One, a panther can tolerate and live closer to a human matrix than we might think. And there's things you can do with people to coexist. And so I think that's what's needed widely throughout Florida.
And just to build on that point a little bit, so when we talk about the Florida Wildlife Corridor, and we talk about the Florida Panther, I mean, I consider it our canary in the coal mine. If the panther can't survive here as a top carnivore in the landscape, we really can't either. And the Florida Wildlife Corridor, it is the green infrastructure that sustains us all. So when we think about Hurricane Ian this fall, the amount of water that hit Florida, as much as we saw in our coastal communities, the Florida Wildlife Corridor truly acted as a sponge, absorbing so much of that. So we are just as dependent on this landscape. And your question about how we better advocate, how we better educate our neighbors, our communities, I think that's something we're all learning ourselves, and it's a journey together, and it's one foot in front of the other. But I do hope in the coming months we have some really comprehensive resources that can help you with that as well.
I'll just echo on what Tori's saying, and I think kind of like what one of the most important lessons of the film really is. So if you protect a panther's range, you don't just protect that panther's range, right? You protect all of the species that it protects within its 200 square mile range. So then it's time for us to basically join the club. We're one of those species that the panther protects. So when a panther is protecting a range, it's actually protecting our water, our land, our ability to have food and fresh air and all the things that we take for granted. So it's kind of time for us to realize this panther is the state animal of Florida because it's protecting Florida, and that's kind of what it is.
Yeah.
Hi, I just want to say I'm incredibly inspired by your work. It's really touches deep to me. As a fellow documentary filmmaker, I think also as a majority people here can speak on having ego grief. And I'm just wondering if you have any words of wisdom for documentary filmmakers specifically focusing on climate change and conservation work.
There's a lot of things to be upset about, there's a lot to be hopeful about. And I think that we can make forward progress. And we've seen it with the effort to designate the Florida Wildlife Corridor with the legislature. We have to really lean into and look for that common ground and build those stories of hope. And the challenges to climate, and the challenges to biodiversity, and the challenges of the future of wildlife, the challenges to resiliency,